Empaths, welcome back to my safe space. Welcome back to the journey of the Tarot. This week we experience the influence of the High Priestess, and we'll be introducing the Empress for a week with the Empress influence. This journey is inspired by a book I picked up called Dirty and Divine by Alice B. Grist. She did a transformative journey through Tarot by spending a day with each card. And I decided to do a week and a vlog about it. A lot of my research is done through this book by one of my teachers, Robert M. Place, called The Tarot, History, Symbolism, and Divination. If you want to pick up that book, Alice's book, a deck, I have my Amazon store in the description. And with an idea board of Journey Through the Tarot. So if you're interested in getting any of those. Okay, so week with the High Priestess. I knew this would be an interesting one. I really have always resonated with the High Priestess. A lot came up for me, so I'm interested to hear what happened for you. But the first thing that happened was the night I filmed the video, I had a phone conversation with my best friend. And then the next day he referenced how great the conversation was, and I couldn't really recall what was said, which never really happens to me. Usually I'm really present and remember almost every detail. So, but I did recall the details of what was happening, like his Bluetooth wouldn't sync, he was driving, then he parked in his driveway to finish the convo, was losing service, things like that. Like I could remember stuff like that. And he was really insulted at first that I didn't remember, because he said it was such a, it was short but important for him that we had the conversation. And when he began sharing the details, I recalled exactly what had been discussed, but I felt like we had had that specific conversation a week ago. So it was this weird, like time-bendy, strange, mysterious experience for me. It felt like I had stored that information or that conversation somewhere else in my brain that I just didn't have access to. It was very surreal. And then he noted that the moon was in Scorpio at the time. And not only that, but it was about to be a new moon in Scorpio. So I thought that was interesting. Right in line with mystery, right? And an intense purge of emotions came with it for me. And creating new beginnings in certain areas. So that was intense for me. I wonder how you experienced that. And then working with the laws of energy dynamics and the business alchemy immersion program that I'm in with my mentor, Shelley Poovey, I began illuminating fears and limiting beliefs around money and provision. One night I even had so much anxiety that I could not go to sleep. Working with shadow archetypes brings up all of the unconscious resistance and conflicting beliefs that need to be released. So I did feel like it was an intense balancing, right, of dark and light, conscious and unconscious, which is right in alignment with the High Priestess, right? I'm really I'm like in awe of her right now. So balancing the dark and light, much like the pillars there, right? Masculine, feminine, dark and light, conscious and unconscious. And then a conversation with a friend turned to the story of Jesus and Mother Mary, who adorns blue and white robes like the High Priestess, much like the High Priestess. We ended up talking about women's roles in the Bible and church. And interestingly, for my first Reiki attunement, we did a meditation to meet our Reiki guides. And for me, it's a funny story I like to tell, because the first thing I saw was the Burger King, and I was like, no way, I am not sharing that. So I was like, that's impossible. And then I kept going on the journey, and eventually Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, and Jesus were revealed to me as my actual guides. And I do believe that was a lesson in or practice in lowering resistance too, because those are religious figures of my childhood. And I felt like I was stepping into a new journey, a spiritual journey. So I was really excited to experience a different archetype, a goddess maybe, or another kind of deity, or another symbol that, or even person that maybe I could feel like it was really stepping into something new. But when I saw the Burger King, I was like, that is a no-go for me. Because I would have to share it too. And I was like, how am I going to work with that? For, all these thoughts come into your mind when you're going through it. So when my real guides were actually revealed, which were religious figures from my past, my upbringing in the Catholic Church, I was much less resistant to them. So I do believe it was a symbol to come in. The Burger King was a symbol to come in to lower my resistance to my actual guides. It's funny because then I shared that with one of my friends who ended up becoming one of my Reiki masters. And she said, oh, I had a similar journey. I saw the Little Caesar's pizza guy first, so before she saw her actual guide. So interesting. It must have been something about resistance. That's how I see it anyway. But what was interesting to me was that even I emphasized Jesus, even though in the actual visualization, in the meditation, it was Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene were the most prevalent influences. And Jesus was sort of like, yeah, I'm here too. But I always emphasize that because, for a healer, how much more powerful can you get with Jesus as your as your guide, right? So even I emphasize Jesus over Mary Mother and Mary Magdalene. And I feel like I need to balance that out by putting them in maybe my business circle for business alchemy, or through meditation, and just, deepening my work with them and experience of them and understanding of how they're guiding me. Because I do see Mother Mary's influence for sure, like unconditional love, having a bleeding heart, being caring, empathic. I mean, I can see that influence in what I do. I guess I haven't always valued it as something that was great for me. But I'm starting to own that. I'm starting to acknowledge that more. I also this week sang a little bit while I haven't sung in a really long time. I haven't done so in a while, and I noticed that I was much more aligned and not aligned in posture and not coming out of myself to oversing or overperform. So I did feel like I was more in my feminine energy, and I was giving a sincere delivery of the songs, a more genuine, less over dramatized delivery of the songs. It felt more relaxed. I wasn't over singing. So I did feel that as maybe an influence here of and then interestingly, I saw a friend of mine who I know from the New York City spiritual community. Her name's Stephanie Rooker, and she's a singer and songwriter, and she does voice workshops. Oh, interesting. She does voice workshops with a friend of mine named Carolina who combines the sound healing with family constellation in New York City. And they do something about mother. It's called All of Our Mothers or something like that. I can't remember the exact name of the event, but they put it together, and I just thought of that. That's so interesting. But Stephanie was talking about singing, and I think it was in the last video or one of the reading videos. They all kind of, it's a blur to me. I talked about how I would take a singer's posture a lot when I would go on stage, where I would be really like myself and relaxed and easygoing during the conversation with the audience, and that could even be improvised. I just never felt a lot of pressure there. I knew I was naturally good at that. But then when I would go to sing, I would take on the singer's posture, this trained opera singer, right? Even when I wasn't singing opera. And I heard Stephanie being interviewed. It was short. It was on Instagram, about when she sings for healing and for improvisation, for example, which was always a huge fear of mine because I was just so trained to sing what's written, don't deviate, right? There's one right way. So it created this huge resistance and block for me to improvise vocally. And I just never liked it. I never thought it would be good enough, and I would really judge it. So I still have a block there. It's not something I'm comfortable with. But she said something interesting in that when she does that, she allows the part of her that's not a singer or doesn't think it knows how to sing show up and sing. Which I thought was brilliant, because that's exactly what happens, right? And I linked that to the exiled child and internal family systems model of healing, right? It's like, you don't know how to sing, so you take the back seat here, and then the manager shows up. But when I studied with a vocal coach who went to Berkeley and did background singing, backup vocals for all kinds of famous artists, right? She taught me that it's the inner child that is the inner genius, and that's who you let on stage. That's who you let play and come out. So I didn't write any of this down. I'm just making these connections now in the moment, but it's all like coming together now. It's like, wow, okay. So that exiled inner child that I said, you don't know how to sing, might be the very part of me that I need to release, right? Out of exile, locked up in that room, wherever it is, and integrate that to come on stage and sing and perform and play so that it doesn't feel like work to me. I think that's the part that I let sing when I'm just playing around alone, but on stage that feels too risky. So that's really interesting. Yeah, I'll have to reflect on that more. But that's just something that was like, wow, how synchronous for her to say that. Because that inner child also allows for the wonder, allows for the mystery. And that's something that's always been the struggle for me as a creative, as an artist who wants to perform live. That was always the struggle in that I can prepare, but I'll never predict. I'll never be able to predict. I can have an idea of how I want it to go and rehearse enough that it's all there for me. But in the moment, it's got to be so rehearsed that it feels improvised, right? It's got to be so rehearsed that I can allow for the energy of the room. I can allow for the heightened state, otherwise known as stage fright, the heightened state. Because if I work against that in resistance to it, instead of working with it and allowing it, it creates all kinds of issues, right? All kinds of problems. But if I allow the fear of that unknown and that mystery to overtake me, I might never step out on stage, right? So I had a conversation with my best friend years ago about that, because I was getting ready for performance and I felt a lot of pressure, and I was like, Israel, if I could just predict how I'm going to feel up there, like, how do I put myself in that position so that I can like know for sure? And he's like, Rachel, it sounds like you're trying to know things that are unknowable. That's the mystery, right? That's the mystery we allow for. And that's part of the reason we love live performance. So if you take that away, what are we really doing? That's the element that makes it exciting, that makes you a professional, that makes it worthwhile. So learning to embrace that mystery through the High Priestess. Yeah, the subject of mystery came up a lot in conversation with my best friend this week about the unknowns and unspoken rules we have that come up in relationship even. And it's come to light for me all of the ways I avoid communicating or use unspoken cues to express myself, working on being more direct. It's definitely an indirect way of communication. And that is known to be a feminine approach, indirectly communicating instead of directly addressing what we want. And I think I found that I'm better at communicating directly when maybe it's not as appropriate. When a more feminine approach might be better received. And then being very indirect in other areas, like at work or for other jobs, not wanting to over communicate and seem annoying or bossy or just a burden, right? So I might not directly communicate in those situations and use nonverbal cues unknowingly, like not really even being conscious of that. And then really hesitating in communicating. My neighbors are so loud. So that's one of the influences of the High Priestess. How annoying. Anyway, hope you can't hear that. So I had been working with Jesus as an archetype in my business. He is also one of my Reiki guides. Like we just said, I could not recall what happened when he returned home to Nazareth. So I asked my friend because I knew he would know. And he sent me an article about how in the Bible it is referenced that Jesus could not do any mighty work there. In fact, in Luke chapter 4, verse 24, he added, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown." The people of Jesus' hometown had no faith in him. And that kind of blew my mind. Like, this has been part of my struggle upon returning to my hometown. Not that I'm a prophet or a miracle worker by any means. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But there's definitely a different way of thinking and belief system here that is closed-minded and fear-based. And while I do respect that and don't want to challenge or convince anyone of anything, like that is not my purpose. I don't feel like I need to change anyone's mind. Like if you're already on board, that's great. But if you have other beliefs, I don't feel like I need to recruit anybody. Like this is just my journey and I'm just sharing it, right? And I have tools that I've picked up along the way that may help you. And that's my purpose, not convincing. But the energy of that, fear-based or the fear-based way, right? The closed-mindedness, it's palpable and very hard on my spirit, for sure. And right after I had this epiphany, another good friend from New York City reached out to me to let me know he was watching one of my reading videos, and it was like I was speaking directly to him. And then he gave me some constructive criticism about wanting to see more of my body and the shuffling in the shot and about the length and just details like that, which I really, really appreciated because I always want to grow. He's like third or fourth generation architect in his family, so he's really visual and he's going to hate this alignment, but it's a little crooked. But I told him, like, I always try to be careful about aligning the shot and all of that, but is he now going to be so obsessed? But there, that's a little better. But yeah, so he was giving me ideas about that. But then the conversation also turned to a woman in his building who also watches my videos. And he told me that one day she approached him and said, "Oh, I noticed that you follow Urban Empath." And he was like, "Yeah, she's a great, great friend of mine." And it was so interesting to me that that I was given this information about this woman in his building watching my videos right after I learned about Jesus's experience in his hometown, like right after. he texted me that. It was so interesting. And then so the pieces of information felt really connected to me. And then later I was telling my best friend about that. I was like, oh, guess what Sergio just told me? And he was like, oh yeah, I spoke to that woman before, like 2 years ago when I was visiting New York. And she said that we were talking about spirituality in the lobby of his building, and we just struck up a conversation about it. And of course, when I talk about spirituality, I talk about you. And she was like, oh yeah, I follow her. And he was like, how did you hear about her? And she said, oh, a friend told me about it. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. Like, and that would have been like 2 months, just over 2 months after I moved back here. So it would have been a really maybe empowering information to have at that time, but I may have needed it more now, right? Need a little boost right now. So that was really cool to know. I'm not sure why he felt compelled to tell me now, but yeah. And he was saying that she gave the review of like, her readings are amazing. They're not just readings, it's psychology. It's so funny, but yeah. So that made me feel valued, right? Because I definitely don't feel that way in my current location. Mother Mary, being another Reiki guide, came up to me during meditation for my first attunement, right, for Reiki. So she was another Reiki guide. And I was driving past my parents' house one day and noticed a statue of Mary in her blue and white robes that my mother had hand painted. She has in her flower garden. And it's always been there, but this week it felt like she was really standing out to me as I called in my experience with the High Priestess. I also recalled from my in-depth training with the Reiki symbols that there are connections between the Western Reiki symbol for distance and time and the Kabbalistic tree of life, right? And remember, the High Priestess, the pomegranates, and the palms represent the spheres and paths, respectively, in the tree of life. And the High Priestess is just covering the bottom of that symbol. And the reason it is connected to that Reiki symbol, the tree of life, is because there are 22 paths on the tree of life and 22 strokes in that symbol. So, and it's also aligned similarly. If you are attuned to Western Reiki level 2, I think Reiki 2, your Reiki 2 attunement, you'll know the symbol for distance. I believe you get all 3 with your Reiki 2. I believe you do. And I obviously can't share the symbols out of respect. You receive them when you're trained, and that's the appropriate order, right? I wouldn't want to disrespectfully share that information with people who aren't attuned. Coincidentally, there are also 22 cards in the major arcana if you count the Fool. And then there are also 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. So some people have also connected that. Which is all really interesting. That just came to me today. I remembered, oh, the tree of life. I got to look into that. Wait, a Reiki symbol. And it's interesting that it's the one for distance and time that I would use for remote healing, right? So it's like not only non-verbal, but even non-local, right? So very interesting to connect that with the High Priestess, right? Also this week, I've done a lot of ancestral healing, particularly with my father, releasing a lot of psychic tension that I feel has helped me ease a lot of the physical tension that I've carried and balance my masculine feminine essences even more deeply. So yeah, I've done a lot of healing there. And I feel like with Samhain, right? that can be connected to ancestral healing as well. So it was right in alignment with the timing. So that was my history and experience with the High Priestess. That's what came up for me, how I integrated this week, her energy, her influence. So what was your experience with the High Priestess this week? I feel like there's probably more, right? There's probably more connections that I just didn't really relate to it consciously, right? I mean, I'm sure that's always the case. But this time I really, really attempted to write down everything, make sure I got it all down. So share with me your experiences of the High Priestess. What was your experience? Did any of that information bring up something for you? Yeah, I'd really like to know your journey too. So now let's get into the introduction of the Empress. I feel like it really flowed for me. Working with the Empress. Let's talk about the history first. So we'll discuss the history of the Empress and the Emperor together, as the history and symbolism are intertwined, and then we'll have less history next time with the Emperor. So we'll just get the history of them both out of the way, because the Empress is going to be linked to the Emperor, and it'll just make more sense, and you'll see why. The history and symbols are intertwined. I mean, how could they not be? They are clearly a married couple. But we'll have a week with each, focusing on the symbols and divination of the Empress in this video, but the history of both. So from the first Italian decks to the Tarot of the Marseille, this pair has represented the Holy Roman Emperor and his wife. And they have consistently depicted the regal couple as crowned and seated on thrones. And they still are, right? Seated on thrones. After the fall of the Roman Empire in the West in 476, the Catholic Church, which was still centered in Rome, began to view itself as a continuation of the Western Roman Empire in spiritual form. With the rise of the powerful Frankish monarch Charlemagne, who lived from 742 to 814, the church saw a way of reclaiming the political aspect of their empire. And on Christmas Day in the year 800, the Pope crowned Charlemagne emperor. The rule of emperor was strengthened by the German monarch Otto the Great in 936 and existed in various forms for approximately 1,000 years. After Otto, the emperor was effectively the ruler of what is now Germany, which is so fascinating to me because my ancestry is German and Italian. But he did have dominion over Italy in theory. So while the emperor was effectively the ruler of what is now Germany, he did have dominion over Italy in theory, but to have actual authority, the emperor would have to take up residence in Italy. Although the emperor did not have much power over northern Italy when the Tarot was developing, the political opportunists who were claiming power over the city-states often maintained claims of authority in the name of the emperor and added the imperial eagle to their coat of arms. And the eagle will be important in the story. The emperor and his symbol, therefore, were seen as a symbolic power only subject to the Pope. And he and his eagle were included in the Tarot, just below the Pope in the sequence of trumps. And the trumps are how we refer to the major arcana in the playing card game, right? And in the old decks. So the emperor was only subject to the Pope, which is why the Hierophant, which is a reference to the Pope, right? An incarnation of the Pope, falls after the emperor, right? And that's the reason the High Priestess and the Empress come after, or come before the emperor and the Pope, right? Because they are trumped in the playing card game. That's the reasoning for that order. Even though the High Priestess and the Hierophant are technically counterparts, and the Empress and the Emperor are counterparts, The reason the High Priestess comes before the Empress is because the imperial rule won over paganism, right? And the High Priestess was a symbol of paganism. So, and because the Empress and the Emperor were under the rule of the Pope even trumps them. So that explains the order there in the major arcana. So, the imperial coat of arms with the eagle was first created by Charlemagne when he was crowned in 800. To create it, Charlemagne symbolically combined the Roman eagle, which faces left, with the German or Frankish eagle, which faces right, into one two-headed eagle facing in both directions. Sometimes the German emperors preferred to use the German eagle with one head, but in the 1400s, when the Tarot was created, the two-headed eagle was in use as the official heraldic device of the emperors. In early printed cards in some decks, we can see this two-headed eagle on the Emperor and Empress cards. In the hand-painted Milanese decks and the Tarot of the Marseille, and many of the decks based on it, we find a single-headed eagle on each card instead. Even if there was confusion about the emblem, it is common sense that the Emperor and the Empress should have the same emblem. The Visconti Sforza Tarot gives the Roman eagle facing left to the Empress and the German eagle to the Emperor, and the Tarot of Marseille does the opposite. It is typical of Renaissance symbolism to make changes in a common symbol, such as the imperial eagle, to embody a subtler symbolic message. So we're going to get into what that symbolic message is now. To the ancient Greeks, Delphi was the sacred center of the world. In the myth of its origin, this fact was determined by Zeus. In the myth, he sets two eagles free to fly in opposite directions around the world until they meet face to face in the sacred center. In ancient, medieval, and Renaissance art, two animals, such as birds depicted face to face, symbolize the sacred center, a symbol of holiness. These images in Western Christian art are influenced by Islamic designs that have an artistic lineage that links them with ancient Babylonian art. In the Renaissance, alchemists made use of the myth of the founding of Delphi as a symbol of their quest for the mystical goal, as can be seen in the famous alchemical text Atalanta Fugiens, meaning Atlanta fleeing, which depicts Zeus letting the eagles fly. I have a picture of that. So this is Zeus from the book Tarot, the Tarot by Robert Empress. This is that picture of Zeus letting the eagles fly, right? Off in different directions. And the eagles facing in opposite directions on the Empress and Emperor may be symbolically linked to the masculine and feminine opposites in the alchemical quest. The red king and the white queen must be separated, purified, and brought back together. Sound familiar, twin flames, right? The story presented in the trumps follows a similar pattern in which masculine and feminine symbols are separated, purified, and reunited. So that's the history of the Emperor and the Empress. Really beautiful, right? So now let's get into the Waite-Smith symbolism. So that would be this card, right? In the Waite-Smith deck. The Golden Dawn relates the Empress to Venus, and we find the glyph of Venus on the Empress's heart-shaped shield. But this is the earthly Venus of Botticelli's Primavera, translated to spring, an Italian Renaissance painting made either in the late 1470s or early 1480s, described as one of the most popular paintings in Western art. The artwork depicts a group of mythological figures, including Venus, in a garden. Botticelli's other very large painting depicting classical mythology is called The Birth of Venus. Both are among the most famous paintings in the world and icons of the Italian Renaissance. So the symbol of Venus on the Empress card is in reference to this earthly Venus, not the celestial body, right? So she sits in sensuality on plush cushions in a field of grain next to a waterfall, symbols of abundance and sensuality. Her white dress is covered with what are most likely stylized pomegranates that are sliced open to reveal their seeds. Right? And hopefully you have the deck so you can see, because sometimes this doesn't focus. This is a symbol of fertility, and Waite says that the Empress is the fruitful mother of thousands. She holds a scepter and wears a crown with 12 stars. This is the crown of the woman clothed in the sun, which was replaced by the crown of Isis on the last trump, revealing her connection to the High Priestess. Because remember, the High Priestess has the crown of Isis, the sun with the half moons. And the description of the Madonna in Revelations was the woman who is clothed in the sun, was part of the description of the Madonna, right? So it shows the link here as she's this crown with the 12 stars here. It shows the link there. She's the mother aspect of the Virgin depicted on the last trump. So that is the Waite-Smith symbolism. So let's get into the divination of what a meaning might be if the Empress shows up in a spread. So for the divination, the Empress represents the feminine principle, the principle that is attractive and attracts what she desires. She is fertility and sensuality. It's a 3D divine feminine as opposed to the 5D, which we kind of associate the divine feminine in the spirit world, relating non-verbally, right, to her counterpart, or non-verbally in general, right, that spiritual aspect. And then this is the 3D material world version, right, that aspect that's on the 3D. Unconditional love, being in nature, mother, wife, pleasure, abundance, nurturing, embodied female, fertility, epitome of femininity, fruitfulness, initiative, action, long days, clandestine, the unknown, difficulty, doubt, ignorance. Can also be connotations. It can also be a mama bird who will gently preen and pluck your feathers. Through her all is born and becomes known. It is with her temperament embedded at our heel that we are dogged, flogged, or empowered. So powerful woman, mother figure. As an archetype, she is the earthly feminine. She is all. Queen of Hearts, mountainous peaks of expectation, dark depths of watery soul, the beloved embrace of stardust hovering over us. She is maternity, promoting fraternity, and ushering grand, unsolicited, unconditional, uncompromising love. Femininity, beauty, nature, abundant, creativity, fulfillment, success in the arts, pregnancy, romance, new business, expression of female energy, artistic pursuits, and intuitive powers, deep connection with Mother Earth. I've also learned that the Empress is the embodiment of all the queens of the minor arcana suits combined. So that's the introduction to the Empress. So now that we have a nice intro to the Empress, and I was probably cut off at some point there, so I hope it all makes it. If there's something really important that doesn't get in, it was very repetitive, the description, I'll add it to a comment or the description of this video, because I realize my camera cuts me off after 38 minutes and I wasn't watching the time closely. But now that we have an idea of the Empress and we have our experience of the High Priestess, let's use sound, the sound of my frosted crystal singing bowl, to further integrate that experience with the High Priestess and introduce the influence of the Empress that we'll experience this week. So let's call in an experience of a week with the Empress and integrate that High Priestess. So you might want to close your eyes, get in touch with your breath, think about your week with the High Priestess and all the energy, all the information that came in and the resonance of that, how that feels in your body. Are you finding you're balancing the masculine and feminine essence? Your conscious and subconscious are balancing, right? A lot of unconscious things are coming to light and illuminating light and dark aspects, right? Are you finding more balance there? And now bringing in the feminine principle, the mother, abundance, earthly Venus, right? All of those things we just learned about the Empress. Nice deep breaths. Excellent. So enjoy your week with the Empress, and I'll meet you back here. Like the video so I know you're following along, and subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell so you can join the premiere of these videos with me. I've been starting to premiere them. So to catch that, click the notification bell. I'm so excited to have you on this journey with me. And if you'd like a personal reading or session, check the description of the video to set that up. And other social media platforms to connect with are in the description as well. All right, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, Empath.